Brad Frost.
Thanks. Hey, everybody.
Ich fand den Film nicht gut. Und ihr?
Ich mag solche Filme nicht.
Ich fand ihn langweilig.
Er war viel zu lang.
Komm, lass uns nach Hause gehen und ein Video anschauen.
Ich wär so gerne Millionär, dann wär mein Konto niemals leer. Ich wär so gerne Millionär, Millionen schwer. Ich wär so gerne Millionär. Geld, 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 Geld. Ich hab kein Geld, hab keine Ahnung, doch ich hab ein großes Maul. Bin weder Doktor noch Professor, aber ich bin stinkend faul. Ich habe keine reiche Freundin und keinen reichen Freund. Von viel Kohle hab ich bisher leider nur geträumt. Was soll ich tun, was soll ich machen? Bin vor Kummer schon erkrankt, hab mir schon ein paar Mal überlegt, vielleicht knackst du eine Bank, doch das ist leider sehr gefährlich. Bestimmt werd ich gefasst und außerdem bin ich doch ehrlich und will nicht in den Knast. Ich wär so gerne Millionär, dann wär mein Konto niemals leer. Ich wär so gerne Millionär, Millionen schwer. Ich wär so gerne Millionär.
So, yeah. So freshman year of high school, this was my introduction to German. I took a German class. This was from the CD-ROM that came in the back of the textbook. And so this was my first exposure to you wonderful people. And I'm pleased to report back that my perception of you has not changed. That's pretty awesome. That's just straight awesome. So I'm going to talk to you about something I'm calling atomic design. So this is the reality. We've seen a lot of pictures of a lot of devices so far in the conference. This whole idea of pixel perfection, of things looking exactly the same, is very much no longer the case, right? All you have to do is look at a tablet, look at a phone, look at a laptop, look at any other device, and know full well that you can't make something look exactly the same, render exactly the same across all of these different devices. So as a result, we've seen this huge shift towards thinking about designs as systems and systematic design. There's been a lot of really great thoughts on this, and Megan just shared a lot of that with you. Laura Kalbag talks about design systems as sort of being this combination of typography and color and texture, shapes and forms, and like a grid systems. Paul Robert Lloyd of Clear Left also sort of talks about the same, this combination of typography and grids and how they all sort of work together. And that's great. And Megan mentioned style tiles created by Samantha Warren. And so again, you start to see that we're starting to deconstruct what's ultimately these web pages, what end up being web pages, deconstructed into these abstract ideas, right? Into this sort of visual direction, different treatments for the same thing that all sort of give a visual feel. Megan mentioned this as well, sort of getting these into the browser. So the people at Sparkbox in Dayton, Ohio, they basically created something that they're calling a style prototype, where it's basically a style tile in the browser. And like Megan said, you're able to view it on real screens much, much earlier. You're able to get a more accurate depiction of what that design system is. I don't care about this stuff very much. I don't care about skeuomorphism. I don't care about flat design. I could give two shits, to be honest. I'm not saying it's not important. It's just not what excites me. And the reason why it doesn't excite me so much is that it's subjective, right? It matters very much on what you're trying to accomplish, and it's always going to be subjective. You know, something you find beautiful isn't the same as what someone else finds beautiful. What I'm more interested in is this, these components. And Harry set this up really wonderfully, but Stephen Hay wonderfully articulated, you know, we're not designing pages anymore. We're designing these systems of components. And what Harry touched on yesterday was, you know, what are our interfaces made of? And I became obsessed with this sort of question, right? What are our Lego bricks? What are our sandwich ingredients? You know, what are the basic building blocks of our web design systems, right? And so I see tools like this and sites like this, UI patterns that sort of highlight and categorize all these different components. Teresa Neal came out with this great mobile design pattern library and stuff. I was more fascinated with this stuff just sort of based on how they were sort of clumping things together and what they were calling things and stuff. Because, you know, I've been working on my own pattern library with the help of everybody else who's contributed on GitHub, which is awesome. But, like, how do we take all of our bits and pieces, all of our different components, and make them work across all these different screen sizes, across all these different devices? It's really challenging. And so we have these sort of crop up of these frameworks, right, that try to take the grunt work out of it. I'm sure we're all sort of familiar with Foundation by Zurb, a responsive framework. Twitter Bootstrap is like the most watched repository on GitHub. It's terribly popular. I really like these things a whole lot, but there's something wrong there. A lot of this is what Kristen was alluding to earlier, wherever you're sort of subscribing to the way someone else has done something already, right? You're worried about lookalikes, right? You know, my buttons look the same as the next site, right? Oh, that's a Bootstrap site. The same way we used to be like, oh, that's a WordPress site or whatever, right? You know, one size fits all. It's like, here's your solution. And it's like, well, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? Potential for bloat and unneeded stuff. You know, you might just be doing a simple brochureware site, and you might not need all these carousels and extra scripts and stuff like that. You know, and it might be the opposite, right? Or it might be too limiting. You might need something more, something that hasn't been included in a framework. The ability to scale, right? The ability to sort of work with your existing site or work with your existing architecture and stuff like that. So Dave Rupert swoops in and saves the day. Tiny bootstraps for every client. I love this. I love this phrase so much because that's exactly what we need to be doing. He goes on to elaborate. He says, responsive deliverables should look a lot like a fully functioning Twitter, bootstrap-style systems, custom tailored to your client's needs. Awesome. And he showed what sort of deliverables they get. They did Microsoft.com with Paravel, and he showed sort of a glimpse into that, right? Into that world, into their process. And so what they're really talking about is establishing sort of this pattern library, this style guide. Anna Debenham is like one of my favorite people working in the web today, and she is who I'd consider to be the authority on style guides. And she wrote an article a couple years ago for 24 Ways that articulates, you know, sort of what these things are, how you use them, and the benefits. And what she found is, and what she says is that establishing this sort of pattern library makes things easier to test, right? Establishes a better workflow instead of just thinking from page to page. You're starting to think about these like abstract components. You're establishing a shared vocabulary amongst everybody in your team. And it's this useful reference to keep coming back to again and again. And so she has this roundup. Highly encourage you guys to take a look at this of front-end style guides. So she rounds them up whenever someone publishes them. She'll throw it on the pile, which is fantastic. And just a couple of them. probably familiar with this one, but this is Pairs, which is created by Dan Cederholm, which is basically a pattern library maker for WordPress and stuff, which is great. Brett Jankard has a really nice one on GitHub called, I think it's just called like Style Guide Boilerplate, right? Where it's just sort of dumping out all of these different components. Jeremy Keith wrote this nice little thing called Pattern Primer, where it just basically loops through with PHP and just sort of sucks up all these little HTML fragments and spits them out, which is really cool. Paul Robert Lloyd took that and sort of took it a step further and created this thing called Bare Bones, which is more robust, right? Because it includes style guide, this like basic setup, and the pattern primer. So this is what it looks like, right? You have these different headers and stuff like that. You have different patterns. So here's sort of like a breadcrumb, a vertical navigation, stuff like that. Form examples, right? You guys, has everybody seen the Starbucks style guide? It's fantastic. And we have Jeremy to thank for that, because he was emailing with the developers there, and they shared this thing, and they said, hey, we have this, here's this documentation that we created whenever we made a responsive site. Would you like to see it? And Jeremy got them to publish it, which is fantastic. So just sort of a glimpse under the hood here, right? Here's what Starbucks is thinking of. They have these block 3-ups, as they're calling them, these featured little modules here, right, with like little image dimensions and everything, examples of tables working in a responsive environment. I love this. This is so cool. This is amazing. And I think that it's certainly the way forward. I think that it makes just so much sense. The problem is that they're really hard to make, right? All those things that I just showed you, they sort of show this smattering of patterns, and it's like, all right, it's hard to go full bore on them. But I do a lot of consulting work, and I'm in these places, and a lot of places that have an existing style guide or have a pattern library or whatever, they have like dedicated people working on the thing. And in a lot of cases, smaller shops, quicker projects, other things, other complications, organizational hurdles, that's a luxury, right? Not everybody has an extra person lying around that they could, dedicate their time to sort of tending this garden. They're often created after the fact, right? Here's our beautiful thing, and let's go through and sort of cherry pick out these different patterns. And they're often too abstract. You see this whole spray of sort of elements and stuff, and you're like, oh, that's nice. But it's sort of hard to sort of bridge that gap between, well, here's our final product, and here's this very abstract list of stuff. They're often only seen as a tool for designers and developers, right? And it's like, oh, cool. I'll be over here, paying the bills. Go have fun with that. And they're often incomplete or only serving the present needs, right? Only the stuff that's currently on the site. And also, they're sort of like lacking this methodology, lacking this sort of sense of structure. And this is what I see as sort of frustrating, and sort of what got me thinking about that is that it's sort of like this arbitrary clumping of stuff together, and it's just this sort of spray of components and links in no particular order and stuff like that. So that's what got me thinking about atomic design principles and what we can do to sort of establish a better way of thinking about design systems. And I'm like, well, surely we're not alone in this. Surely we're not the only one creating systems out there. And where I ended up landing was thinking about chemistry. This is it's an odd slide, to say the least. But I had a high school chemistry teacher. There we go, looping it back to high school. See that initial video? I had a crazy high school career. But my chemistry teacher was this like crazy dude, He was a sniper. He like wore this belt buckle that like said, "I'm a sniper." It's like weird. But he was easily one of the hardest teachers I've ever had. And he gave us this big ass packet of chemical equations that we needed to balance. And me sort of loving rote, memorization and just like sort of going through the motions kind of stuff, I just like blasted through these things. Like I was having a good time with it. I handed them in like 2 weeks later than before they were due. And but it got me thinking, like we have all these chemical elements, right? That make up all known matter in the universe, right? And those atoms combine together to form molecules, right? And those molecules compound to form these complex molecules, right? To form these even more complex beings. Go a step further, right? You have these organisms, right? Things all created by these things, even complex organisms. This is what a Google search for people gets you. I'm like, I need a picture of people, and I get a fat dude in a beret with a pretty kick-ass reflection going on, which is pretty great. And then, we get into this, like all this planetary shit, for lack of a better word. That's actually a scientific word for it. Planetary shit, like stars and all that stuff. But it's like it's all made of the same stuff, the same finite raw materials, the basic building blocks for all matter. And so as I sort of immersed myself in this sort of type of thinking, I was like, okay, so let's apply that to the web. Well, we have these finite building blocks for the web. This is actually this is a real site. It's awesome. It's joshduck.com/periodic-table.html, but it organizes all of our HTML elements out in the periodic table. It's pretty clever, right? And so that sort of got the ball rolling and sort of led me to start thinking of it as this sort of assembly, going from the very raw, abstract core all the way up to our final products. So this is what I'm calling atomic design. And it consists of these 5 distinct stages. So we have these atomic units, right? We have these molecules. We have organisms. And then eventually we break that pattern because, I'll tell you in a bit, but we get into client land, and I'm pretty sure they don't want to be looking at universes or something like that. So let's get into it. To start out at the very basic again. So these are our building blocks. We have this finite set of HTML tags that comprise every web interface out there, right? And they're pretty set. Again, they're finite. We have new elements emerging, new tags coming about, other ones being deprecated and stuff like that. Very rarely do we introduce a new element, right? Parallaxium, maybe. Atomic weight, 10.22 megabytes. Hardy har performance joke. All right. Sorry, guys. I appreciate the effort. So whenever we look at this, right, we have, these are 3 atoms, right? We have a label. We have an input. And we have a button. Pretty straightforward, right? And whenever you see this in pattern libraries and stuff, this is more or less what they're doing, right? Here's a header, here's a second level header, here's a third level header, et cetera, right? Here's a color input, here's another kind of input, here's an email input, right? But even other things that aren't like necessarily tags themselves, but like colors, font stacks, right? And so we have this basic building block of an experience. And basically what we're getting at is that it can't be broken down any further, right? It's as far as it goes. It's the end of the line, right? And it's really abstract. Again, like a client's not going to look at this and be like, oh, cool, Adam's right. But it's often not too useful on its own, right? Again, you're looking at it and you're like, okay, it's nice, it's there, it's sitting there. But it's good for this at-a-glance reference. It's good to get an idea of what your global styles are. It's good to see that stuff sort of abstracted at that level. But when things really start getting better and a little more useful for us is whenever those elements start combining. This is my favorite scientist, Busta Rhymes, acting fool, break your shit down to molecules. So we have these elements, and they combine to form these molecules, which take on different characteristics. They have their own unique properties, right? So whenever we apply that to the web, we have these three distinct elements that all sort of join together to serve a purpose, right? A search form is born. And this thing can do something now, right? It's not just an atom floating in space. It's now a practical piece of an interface, right? So we have these groups of atoms bonded together, smallest fundamental unit of a compound. So again, they have their own distinct properties. More concrete than atoms. It encourages what Harry was talking about yesterday, right? This do one thing and do it well type of mentality, right? Wherever we're sort of constructing these things because we need it to do something, right? We need a search form in order to search the site, and we want it to search the site very well. We're not particularly interested at this stage in the game in how it sort of operates in the grand scheme of things. We're just trying to focus on making it do that one thing really well. And often serves as the backbone for a more complex system, right? And so, which brings us to our next stage, which is that of organisms, right? So we take our little search form molecule, and now we put it into context, right? So here's the header of a website. And you see this a lot, right? These are all, in their own way, organisms, right? These sort of self-contained chunks. They combine different sets of functionality depending on what it's trying to do. You have a logo, you have a navigation molecule, you have a search form molecule, you might have some other sort of unique types depending on your site, right? But so, again, you're sort of clumping these things further together, clumping these molecules, these atoms further together to create something that's a bit more complex. And it can consist of similar things or different things. So like a header might consist of a bunch of disparate things like a form and a navigation and a logo and stuff. And those are all sort of three different things. But they could all also be sort of the same. So think of like a list of comments or something like that, right? Think of a list of posts or related posts or social buttons or something like that. Right? It encourages creating these standalone, portable, reusable components, right? They are these sort of, self-contained objects that you could put anywhere. And then we finally get up to the page level type stuff. So these are templates, right? So here's our header. Header sort of looks a little weird on its own, but it starts to make sense whenever you put it in the context of a page, right? So this is what we're looking at. My friend Matt Griffin in Pittsburgh, he owns a design studio called Bearded, and he's written a lot of really great stuff for A List Apart, and most recently is talking about sort of moving away from static comps and into more sort of, having the client sign off on these sort of responsive wireframes, right? These responsive designs. So here's some examples that he gave for a site that he did. And he starts off very, very linear, again, this is mobile first, even though it's a desktop view. But it's sort of free from any sort of layout. It's just sort of getting the guts on the page, laying out and establishing the page hierarchy. There's nothing crazy going on from like an aesthetic standpoint. It's just more or less to just get the pieces in place. And only later does he come back through and they start to apply some layout and some color ultimately and all of that stuff, which is great. And so you have these page level components now, And they're mostly comprised of these groups of atoms, again. So we're sort of like going in this like linear buildup from very abstract to more concrete. They begin their life as HTML wireframes, but going through, again, a lot of people showed a lot of messy, graphs about, process and stuff like that. And that's very much what these things become, right? They start their life doing this very sort of rough sketch kind of view. But over time, that's the stuff that you start crafting, that you start, fine-tuning and applying, color and texture and typography and all that great stuff to. And so they sort of gradually become higher fidelity, and that's fantastic. Again, so this is starting to get into the land that the client actually cares about, right? They're like, that's a web page, I get it, right? They're able to view it on their phone, they're able to view it on their tablet, they're able to give feedback on the hierarchy, they're able to click on things, they're able to roll over things, they're able to interact, and that's very, very cool. Eventually, it becomes, right, the final product. It can begin its life as the sketch. You can go through and refactor things, you could go through and tighten things up, but ultimately, this is what we're trying to get at, where we're not doing something entirely separate only to throw it away and redo it for real this time, right? And then the last stage is this concept of pages, right? So now we have our templates in place with some sort of lorem ipsum and some just basic stuff, and then bam, hit them over the head with the awesome, right? The stuff that's in context, the stuff that we're replacing, we're wiping away, that lorem ipsum text. We're showing real imagery, we're showing real content, we're showing real videos. We're trying to plug in as much real stuff as possible. So there's specific instances of a template, right? We don't want to do away with the templates because ultimately we're going to come back to those. But it's the highest fidelity. It gives the client something to look at, right? It's the hub that everybody's sort of revolving around because it's actually the thing that people will see, that people visiting the site, the product, whatever, will see. It could test the effectiveness of a system, right? It's hard to see things in very abstract terms, right? A client once said to us, "You're trying to get me to comment on, on how I like this face by only seeing the nose, by only showing me the nose." It's like, well, do you think that this face is attractive? And it's hard. It's hard without seeing it in the context, right? And we could also test variations of a template, right? Content tweaks, design tweaks. Do we show 10 posts? Do we show 5? We could include extra things. We could exclude things that are sort of variations of a template, but don't necessarily justify creating an entirely new template for that. So that's that. So that's atomic design. It is it's a methodology for creating a design system. It's from going from very abstract to very concrete in this sort of logical progression, right? In this way that sort of makes sense. It's this assembly, and it benefits everybody. And this is why I like it, is because it's not just a designer tool. It's not just for the developers. It's not just a code reference thing, although it is that, right? It's something that you could sort of sit everybody down around, and it becomes this watering hole for everybody, right? And ultimately, the creators are going to care more about the abstract stuff a lot more than the clients, but it's important for the client to sort of be in line with whatever it is you're doing and understand sort of how the system works. And what I found in doing this is that I sort of treat the very core, very abstract stuff as like a reference, like come back to it if I need to just sort of get, my basic, pieces in place. But most of my building is happening whenever I start stitching things together, right? And so that happens in these sort of three phases, between molecules, organisms, and templates. And then the pages, like I could really care less like whose face is sitting in an image, right? I'm more concerned about delivering a good, solid foundation. But at the same time, we need to see that page level stuff in order to again validate that those templates are effective, or if we should go back to the drawing board and sort of restructure things. So again, it provides this methodology. It's easily to traverse from abstract to concrete, right? It promotes consistency and cohesion, collaboration, right? It assembles rather than deconstructs. And yeah, so that's that. So with that, I have something to show and to announce, but I'm bad at that. I'm really bad at, I don't know, like making things and saying, here's the thing. So in my sort of awkwardness, I recruited Jeremy, who's like an infomercial wizard, to help me out. So here it goes. You guys ready? Yeah? All right, thank you. Yeah. Does today's modern web landscape have you feeling frustrated, angry, and confused? Do existing frameworks and boilerplates have you pulling out your hair like a madman? Does testing on all these devices and having to worry about how your designs look and function across all these different browsers and all of these devices just have you throwing up your hands in despair? Stop! Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to introduce to you Pattern Lab. This is a robust new design system creation tool for the web. Pattern Lab is fully featured. It includes a toolkit for building your very own atomic design system catered to fit your needs. Thanks, guys. That was awesome. Oh, man. So Pattern Lab. A lot of this, thanks for sticking in there with the philosophical bits, but it's important to set that up. But I did, so in sort of thinking about things this way, I wanted to construct a system that would help me and my team do better work for the people that we're doing work for. So what I'm defining Pattern Lab as is pretty generic, which is it's just a collection of tools to help you create and maintain this sort of atomic web design system. So here's what it is. It's a comprehensive component library, all the stuff that you need for your project. It's a pattern starter kit, lots of stuff to get started. It's this builder, right, that sort of stitches all these things together and sort of takes a lot of the legwork out of it. But it's also this viewer, right? It's sort of simultaneously this viewer to help, again, ensure that your designs are looking and functioning great across all these different screen sizes. And it's also a design annotation tool. So I'll show you sort of what I'm looking at, but first I will say what it isn't. It's not a UI framework. It is not Twitter Bootstrap. It is not Zerb. Again, I'm of the mentality that we do this shit ourselves, right? It isn't really language, library, style dependent, right? You don't need jQuery. Like Sass, cool, go ahead and use it. Like less, cool, go ahead and use it. Like vanilla CSS, cool, go ahead and use that. Again, it's this idea is that we should be creating these systems to serve our needs, right? We shouldn't be dependent on too many other things in order to get something off the ground. And it's also not meant to be incredibly rigid. Again, I've just sort of defined this methodology, but there's actually a lot of like looseness built into it, which is sort of nice. Like I'll sort of, working on these projects, I'm like, is this a molecule? It's like a little bit more, but is it like a full-on like organism? And it's like, does it really matter at the end of the day like that much? No, not really. So, but again, I still think that that methodology is great as far as thinking about these design systems. So here's what it looks like for the most part. I don't want to go into the browser. I've been in enough talks where it's like, hang on, give me 5 minutes. So over the brow, like, you know, awkwardly put it in the other window and stuff. So I'm going to do everything sort of contained, if that's all right with you. But not pretty. Again, why? Audience participation, do that shit yourself, right? It's not meant to give you a UI, right? It's not meant to give you aesthetic style. It's not a flat design system. You do that shit yourself. So again, we're coming back to Dave's quote of like this custom tailored to fit and serve your design need, your client's needs. So I don't know that. But again, the idea is to sort of provide the system that can help sort of facilitate whatever it is that you need to make. So one of the core parts of it, there's two parts. There's a builder and a viewer. And I'll go through the builder real quick just to sort of show you what it sort of does. So again, we have these 5 discrete steps. So if we come in here and sort of, you know, zoom in, you'll see we have atoms, we have molecules, we have organisms, we have templates, and we have pages. So if we start with atoms, this is really interesting, what to include in this sort of atomic level. It was either last week or the week before, or May 8th, okay. Yeah, so pretty recent. Cloud4, if you're not familiar with them already, they're just amazing. They're just like the smartest people out there. But Tyler Sticka, he went through and he documented what these pattern libraries, what these frameworks all include in their libraries. And he went through and made this just crazy huge spreadsheet. And so I've been a bit frustrated, like looking through, and because I'd need something, and I don't want to have to make all these things from scratch. So basically, what I've been doing slowly but surely has been bringing all of those things into this design system, into Pattern Lab. And so the idea is that you start off, you have sort of everything, even shit you don't need, but that's all right. You could tuck it away for later because you might not need it now. But like 2 months down the road, they're like, oh, we actually do need to include like the delete tag or something like that. So it's sort of better to be on the comprehensive side rather than to be on the short side of things. But so just like sort of an example of sort of like what's in here, right? So we have like global colors, we have global fonts, headings, subheadings with links, unordered lists, and all that good stuff. A bunch of other different sort of image types, right? So a lot of us have like sort of a CMS pumping out images of certain dimensions. We have different images doing different things, like a logo, like icons and stuff like that. It's really important to have all under one roof. So as you sort of scroll down here, we have our color palette, we have our fonts. We also have things that I've never seen in other pattern libraries, which is like defaults for animations. These very sort of like invisible elements to a design system. But again, that should be consistent throughout an interface. So sort of bubbling that up and articulating it visually, I think, is really important. And then we have like addresses, we have timestamps, we have lists, we have all these sort of defaults. And again, not pretty, and it's not supposed to be, right? You're supposed to do with this what you will. Avatar, another invisible thing, right? Loading icons and stuff. Nobody ever thinks of that shit, right? But just having it right there off the bat makes you say, okay, we need to address that, which is great. Buttons, tables, videos, audio tags, stuff like that. Now, as we sort of go down a little further, then we start getting into the molecular stage. So we're looking at Grid system, oh man, boy do I get that question every day. And again, I'm not going to do it for you because do that shit yourself, right? So I give you like a couple little things, halves and quarters and thirds and stuff like that. But again, that's meant to be replaced with whatever grid system you decide to use. But then you also have these like little chunks, right? So this is a pretty common pattern, right? Like image, headline, excerpt. That's sort of used a lot, right? And then you also have maybe a variation on that, right? Sort of like an inset one with like a semi-transparent overlay. Right? So here's what that looks like. In HTML, so all I'm doing is I'm including a little atom, right, an image asset, and then the rest of it's just some markup. And then this is how you can chuck one of these into a later template, right? Oh, I need some pagination. And it's like chuck it in there. I built it in PHP, but that's really just because that's all I know, and so we'll get to that in a little bit. Organisms. So whenever you look at this is a particular section of a site, right? This is like a little comment block. So you can submit a comment and you can view a comment, and it's this self-contained thing, right? Collectively called comments. So here's what that looks like. Now we're including these molecules, right? So we have a comment form as a molecule, as its own sort of discrete little section, and then we have a single comment as its own molecule. Right? And so what you're able to do is like really quickly and easily just sort of stitch these things together and build up like your actual templates pretty quickly, which is really nice. And then you can include it just like this, right? You include the comments. Okay. And so I'm working with Dan Mall right now on these projects, and he created something called element collages, which is like super awesome. And what he's doing is establishing a design system for not necessarily the whole site, but sort of in isolation, sort of being able to riff on all these different sort of header treatments and different stuff like this. This is for a different project that he's doing, but it's nice because I'm able to have this sort of organism sort of laid out, and he's able to sort of see how that's working and reacting in the browser, and he's able to sort of riff over that and sort of establish a visual direction. And that's really cool, and what we've actually found is that Dan's making most of his stuff for me, ultimately. Like, he's not really putting so much of this in front of the client anymore. We'll sort of like roll this into our HTML and then just show that, which is pretty interesting. But again, like this system allows for that to happen. And whenever we get up to the template side of things, here's where we start stitching together these sort of discrete organisms into finally a sort of like a page layout. So this looks something like a web page now, right? So we have a logo, we have a nav, we have our search form, we have an article, we have related articles, recent tweets, stuff like that. So here's what that looks like. If you're familiar with like WordPress and stuff, this should look pretty familiar to you, right? So it's like you have a header, you have a footer, and you have some stuff in between. You have some layout specific stuff, and then you could just chuck whatever you need into them. And then finally we get into the page level stuff. So here we're just replacing some content. And again, this is super grayscale because this is what I'm going to put out as an example. So the idea isn't to sort of like, totally gussy it up and establish a clear visual direction. It's meant to be intentionally grayscale. But so here's one of my clients' pages. So this is what pages they're including and the things that I'm coding up. And then here's another one. And they have all sorts of shit. Holy shit. And so it's been pretty wild, but it's actually been nice because it tests the system and it scales quite nicely. We're able to create little variations on different pages. And so that's pretty cool. And then the latter part of it, I don't have too much time, but I want to go through and just show you that this is not the way, right? The fold, God, how many times do we have to have this conversation? But whenever I look at all these responsive web design viewers, too many of them just sort of bucket in these device dimensions, which is just totally missing the point, right? It's more than just 320 pixels, it's more than just 480. And that's what led me to release this tool a while ago called Ish, which sort of stretches and doesn't like adhere to a specific device dimension, but rather just sort of these general ranges. And so this is built into Pattern Lab as sort of this viewing tool. And so again, so I'm clicking small again and again, and you're getting a different value, sort of roughly in that small zone. And then whenever you go over to medium-sized screens, then it gets a little bigger. And then whenever you go to large, it will expand a little further. And this is great. And this is what the clients are playing with. And they're saying, like, it's sort of a little weird in medium mode. It looks good in small mode and stuff like that. But that's exactly the kind of stuff you want them to comment on. It's not just like, oh, iPhone view, blah, right? You're expanding their horizons. Disco mode, right? So this is an automated sort of stress test. It just sort of goes on its own and totally like crazy, just sort of, bounces around the room. But it's great because you're able to sort of stress test your designs to make sure that it's working across all screen sizes and not just these self-contained like little buckets. And then the last one that I just made is called Hey Mode for the great Stephen Hay, who said, start with the small screens first, expand until it looks like shit, time for a breakpoint. And so that's exactly what this does. So you go up here and click Hey Mode, and it goes into the small screen, and it slowly expands, and then you're able to be like, aha, that's where I should stop. So what it does is it gives us these tools to sort of fine-tune our designs. We have a manual mode now wherever we're able to sort of manually drag the browser and stuff like that. We're also able to change the values. So if you do indeed need to get to 768, it's there, but it's not there by default, right? The client, you have to get to it. And again, it's just setting smarter defaults so that people are thinking more broadly right off the bat. Go through really quick. We have view modes. So we could view the code underneath all these patterns. We could view it clean, like outside of the framework. You view it raw, it opens in a new tab on its own outside of the viewer. And then also annotations. And annotations are really interesting. They're not there quite yet, but basically what you can do is set these annotations so that in context, you can view comments and usage on a particular thing. This is a system I set up for a demo I did for Google. It's really nice to be able to sort of just tap on things and say, like, well, what's this about? Like, what sort of rules do we need to consider and stuff like that. So it's great. So again, wrapping up, serves as a hub for the entire design process. It's useful for everyone. Again, it's not just a designer or developer tool. It's like sort of the watering hole for the entire design process. Again, you could go from abstract to concrete really quickly. You could write things however the hell you want to. And you're starting with the system rather than deconstructing it later. It encourages flexibility, and you could document as you go. There's a lot of things we're doing next, and thankfully I recruited this guy, Dave Olson, who's just an absolute beast. And what he's doing is he's plugging in Mustache. That's me. I don't want to scare you. But as a way to sort of plug in different content for like making that jump between templates and pages, to be able to pipe in like different content while still keeping the component the same, which is nice. So like if you wanted to replace that with real headlines like 4 different times doing 4 different things, you could do that easily. Minimize dependencies. Again, right now it's PHP, but it doesn't have to be. Just something that could loop through a bunch of files and spit them out. More languages. We have like CodeKit and Hammer, and like so here's how those might work, where you're just sort of chucking these like little bits and pieces in there, testing things. So that's that. So here's a bunch of people who have all been great in sort of either inspiring this on the right column here, or have been working directly with me to make this. I'm going to throw it on GitHub. It's going to be here. So I don't know if you want to snap a picture of that. I'll tweet it out later. But I didn't have time to get it done. I was too busy working in iMovie. I have my priorities in all the right places. And then the actual demo will be on my own site at that subdomain. This is fantastic. I think that this is a great evolution of things. A lot of people have influenced my thinking about this sort of things, and all these great emerging sort of talks about sort of modularity and design systems and stuff. That's why these events are so great, right? We have so much opportunity to sort of come together and exchange ideas, and even exchange ideas with people who you might not do things their way. Again, I'm not a bootstrap guy or anything like that. I'm probably not going to use it myself, but at the same time, you could totally appreciate what other people are doing to solve the same problems that we're at. And so we need to be more open-minded. We need to be, thinking bigger than just our own little problems. And I say this because this is yesterday.
Yeah!
So this is my excitement.
That's so cool.
Wave your hand if you can. There he is. So he hooked up Ish to this remote
amazing.
Control thing, and he's able to sort of
that you have
change
the
the
preset
viewport
buttons.
size
So small,
remotely.
medium, and
So you're able to sit back and resize your browser. How cool is that?
Yeah.
How freaking cool is that? Yeah, seriously.
That's it.
It's just so
That's it
neat.
right there. That's amazing.
So, this is that Ish tool I did in a day and a half as sort of a dumb, stupid thing that I was just kicking around in my head, and there are already 20 of those things out there. But just this is amazing that could happen. And that just very casually, he came over to me yesterday and he's like, "Oh, let me show you something." And we were talking about other things. "Oh, I can show you real quick." It's amazing. And I say this because it has bigger implications than just that, and than just sort of taking an idea and moving it forward. My biggest career accomplishment so far has not been through any work that I've done, but recently, maybe in the last year or so, AIDS.gov in the U.S., our sort of central repository for all things around HIV awareness and AIDS awareness and stuff like that, they launched a new responsive site. And I was listening to an interview with the project manager on that project, and was more or less paraphrasing, things I was saying, and move in a future-friendly direction, and more or less quoting me. And that is what it's all about. It's not really about the projects you're working on. It's about the lasting effect you have on the web. Every time you file a browser bug, every time you answer a question on Stack Overflow, every time you ask a question on Stack Overflow, every time you tweet someone a useful resource, every time you're contributing to someone's repository on GitHub, every time you're taking that and making it better, you're doing good for the web, and you're doing good for all of us and the people using the web. And I think that that's just tremendously powerful. It's not about what we do ourselves, but rather what we can encourage other people to do. And that requires us to work hard, to be open, to not be an asshole about things, and to most importantly, just share what you know. So thanks, everybody.